Russia has laid out a game plan on how they could possibly end the war in Ukraine.
The conditions are very simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. As soon as Kyiv declares that it is ready for such a decision and begins the actual withdrawal of troops from these regions, as well as officially notifies that they abandon plans to join NATO, an order to cease fire and begin negotiations will immediately follow from our side, literally at the same minute.
What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing good. It's a beautiful day. Thank you very much for stopping by. You are very much appreciated. I think it's very important that we talk about these subjects because I know many people are asleep. They don't see what's happening. And I think this is very dangerous. You can only combat something or resist against something if you understand what's happening. So Russia has laid out a game plan on how they can end the war in Ukraine. They have some conditions. Say, okay, here are conditions. If you want the war ended in Ukraine, this is what you have to do. So Russian state outlets reported that Russian Vladimir Putin demanded a complete withdrawal of Ukrainian troops in a very specific territory. And this is mainly the eastern side of Ukraine. They want a complete remove of Ukrainian soldiers in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. So you want them to leave that area free. That's number one. Putin said during the meeting with the leadership of Russia Foreign Ministry that as long as Ukraine begins real withdrawal of troops from this region and will also officially notify the abandonment of plans to join NATO, on our part, immediately at the same minute, an order will follow to cease fire and begin negotiation. So you want Ukrainian soldiers to leave that very specific area of Ukraine and also abandon their plan to join NATO before he instructs his people to stop the war in Ukraine. So what are these territories? Donetsk, Luhansk, excuse my pronunciation, I know it's crazy, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. I'm not Ukrainian, so what do you expect? When you ask these people to pronounce African, they cannot pronounce African. So, let me just put it out of context, fellas. In South Africa, black South African can pronounce, for most cases, Afrikaners. Afrikaners are white people that speak Afrikaans that live in South Africa. They live together. They're all South Africans. Black South Africans can pronounce Afrikaans names with no issues. But Afrikaans people cannot pronounce black South African names. Don't you find that crazy? I mean, you live in the same country. You were born in the same country. Afrikaans people can pronounce Italian names. They can try to pronounce French names. They can pronounce Norwegian names. But they cannot pronounce black African names. Okay, anyway, let's get back to context. So, Russia has asked Ukraine to remove its troops from these territories. Why? Because these territories, as per the Russians, belong to Russia. Because the majority of people that live there speak Russian. So they have a very high level of belonging to Russia. So these are what we know today as Ukrainian territories. But the majority of people are more faithful or loyal to Russia than they are of Ukraine. And when the war started, Russia felt like these people are being discriminated against. And Ukraine was bombing those areas with no remorse because most of the people that live there are pro-Russians anyway. So Russia felt like, no, because you don't treat these people appropriately, let's rather have you move away from this territory. I don't know if you remember, but a while back, the ICC had called up Putin for some crime. They say that he should be arrested. There was a warrant of arrest, international warrant of arrest against Vladimir Putin.
International Criminal Court issue is just the start in the process of accountability and holding Russia and its leader to account for the crimes and atrocities they are committing in Ukraine.
The reason to that was because they had removed children from one of these territories and sent them to Russia. The Russians say that they did that because they were trying to protect them from war, because they knew that the Ukrainian didn't care about these children, because these children were all Russian speaking. So they had to move them to Moscow or to Russia to protect them from any attack that was coming to that space. Now, does this make any sense to you? Obviously, this has happened in one of the biggest meetings so far about the war. I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but many countries have come together to go discuss in Switzerland about the situation in Ukraine. They had a big meeting to discuss about peace in Ukraine, but guess who was not invited? Russia was not invited. So many people find it insane. How can you have peace talk about two people that are fighting each other, but one of them is absent? Is that really about peace or something else? Moscow was notably not invited, and has in the past touted the futility of third party attempting to negotiate a resolution to the conflict without Russia participation. So Moscow, in other words, saying, how can you go talk about peace about Ukraine and Russia without calling Russia? This is futility. This is a waste of dollars, they're calling it.
It is an absolutely absurd goal to discuss Ukraine without Russia's participation. It is obvious that it is not a result-oriented. That's why many countries don't want to waste time.
Now, NATO and the Europeans have hit Russia where it's really hurt. They've taken money away from Russia to give to Ukraine. You know, for the past few months, they had been sending money to Ukraine to help them fight Russians. But now they're not going to use their own money to send to Ukraine anymore. They are giving Russian money in Europe to give to Ukrainians. Agreed in principle to issue $50 billion in loans to Kiev that are backed by the profit generated by roughly 300 billion euros of Russian central bank assets frozen by the West. The West froze 300 billion Russian central bank assets. Okay, so that's the issue of having the same monetary system with people that are not necessarily your friend, because they're going to use your money against you. So they've taken the Russian money, and out of 300 billion, they're taking $50 billion to give to the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. And Vladimir Putin is not happy about this. He said this is pure robbery. This is stealing from the Russians. And this is not the first time, fellas. I mean, this is not the first time. I mean, England has kept money from many other countries before. I don't know why people put money there. This is crazy. Why do you take, I don't know. People don't learn. People don't learn. Okay, because we know how does it work. Zimbabwe was not very much liked by British and Americans, and all of that. What happened? They kicked them out of SWIFT system. They sanctioned them. SWIFT system is what you need to transact with other entities. If you want to send money to another company, you need to use the SWIFT system. SWIFT system is the reason why you can today send money to your mom via your cell phone. That's what allows you to do that. If your bank is not part of the SWIFT system, you cannot send money to a friend in Ivory Coast or Gabon or Malawi, Botswana. You cannot. So Zimbabwe was kicked out of SWIFT because they were not happy with Zimbabwe. Russia has been kicked out of SWIFT. But luckily for them, they created an alternative system of sending money across with the Chinese. So if they're not happy with you, they're going to make you suffer in many ways. And this doesn't really matter. I think our country is really free to do whatever they want to do. If they have one system that everybody has to agree on, and then provided there's a country that's seemingly superior to any other country, and he has his mouth and hands on everybody else's business. So that's a bit crazy. Now, this situation occurred after Russia sent a unit of its naval force with a nuclear-capable submarine to Cuba. Why did Russia do that? Russia did that after America allowed Ukraine to use long-range missiles given by America to bomb inside Russia. And Ukraine started utilizing them. They even hit a few spots in Russia. And Russia didn't like that. And as a show of force, many experts believe the reason why Russia sent this boat was to send a clear message to America that, listen, we can bomb you. The ocean will not be an issue anymore. Not like in the past. And a day later, after Russia sent the nuclear-powered submarine to Cuba, America sent a fast nuclear-powered submarine to Cuba, to the same port, without the consent of the Cubans. And they say, no, it's just a visit routine. A visit routine, obviously, coincidentally, just a day after Russia sent its troop, and it floats to Cuba. So, fellas, I think we're living a very interesting moment. Today, the G7 came together, sitting together, discussing about Ukraine, what sort of game plan they should have, and what they should do to get peace in Ukraine. And the Russians say this is absolutely crazy, because how can you go talk about peace in Ukraine if you don't invite Russians? It's like saying, okay, let's talk about peace in a neighborhood, but there's that one big neighbor you don't call. How do you get peace without that neighbor? It's just crazy. How do you think this will pan out if World War ever started again? Do you believe the Chinese will help Russians? Or do you think Chinese are political? They're just playing a game. They're just giving Russia support from the outside. But once things really start, they will pull away. Let me just remind you here, many countries were invited. About 160 countries were invited to attend this meeting about finding a solution for Ukraine. And only 90-something countries showed up. That's not a lot. And among the big countries that did not show up, China did not show up. Didn't China show up in support for Russia? Perhaps. Maybe they wanted Russia to be present in order for them to take this seriously. And because Russia was not invited, they felt like there's no need for us to go. Let me show support. Let us show support to Russia that has been a very loyal partner to us. Let me know how you feel about this. It's always a great pleasure. Russia says Ukraine must free those territories. They must go. And they must abandon their idea of joining NATO. Let me just remind you here. During the Cold War, Berlin in Germany used to be divided in two parts. There was one side that was controlled by the West and the other side controlled by the communists. There was a big wall separated one city. Then some politician from America went to the USSR and said, listen, if you free Berlin for us, let it be one open city, we will not move an inch to your side. NATO will not move an inch to your side, to the east. We will not take any country. We will not take any city. If you do free the city and allow Berlin to be one city, we will not move to an inch.
We told the Russians in 1991 and 1992 repeatedly and in writing, although not in a signed treaty, that if they removed the 400 troops from Germany and allowed Germany to reunite under NATO, that we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east. We've since then moved it 1,000 miles to the east and 14 countries.
Now, if you look at the map from the time this was said up until now, look how many countries that used to be part of USSR become part of NATO. And perhaps that's the reason why Vladimir Putin feels the danger of letting Ukraine, perhaps in the future, becoming part of NATO. By Ukraine becoming part of NATO, that just means big danger for Moscow, because a nuclear bomb shot from Ukraine to Russia will only take 6 minutes to reach Moscow. And that's a major danger for them, at least according to them. Let me know how you feel about this. What's the best way to go about this? We also remember that maybe the reason to this war are not necessarily what we believe it is. I want to hear what you think. God bless.